Welcome to the webinar, How Aculon Surface Coatings Are Enabling Medical Devices. Thank you for joining us today. We look forward to taking you through over the next hour an overview of Aculon, introducing you to some of our surface treatments that are now being used in medical devices, to talk specifically about electronics protection, in particular waterproofing for printed circuit boards for electronic devices. And then we're going to go into some of the technologies we have for repellency and hydrophilic applications and give you some case studies for where these are being used in this area. We'll leave plenty of time, hopefully about 20 minutes, for questions and answers. So please type the questions into the question box that is available on your control panel, and we'll try and tackle as many as we can at the end of the presentation. A copy of this presentation will be sent to all registrants, and this webinar will be recorded. My name is Edward Hughes, and I'm delighted to join you this afternoon. I have several of my colleagues with me who will be taking you through some sections of this webinar. So let me start with who we are. We're a leading provider of surface modification technologies. We focus exclusively on modifying surfaces and like to think of ourselves as surface solution experts, where we develop and produce these technologies here at Aculon in order to modify a broad variety of surfaces. We work with metals, glass, polymers, and as you can see, the treatments include a variety of types. Hydrophobic, so to repel water with water contact angles from 100 to 120 odd. Superhydrophobic, where water contact angles are above 130. Oleophobic, to repel oils and grease. Hydrophilic, to attract water, and some adhesion promoting treatments that we have as well. All our treatments are very thin. Many of them are at the nanoscale. We tend to focus on easy to apply applications, spray, wipe, or dip. And in general need minimal equipment for that. We try to avoid cure requirements and certainly avoid anything that requires a vacuum deposition process. So these are easily scalable type applications. From a business perspective, Aculon develops, produces, and ships chemistry. We also do the application engineering, where we work with customers to qualify the right type of treatment into your application. And finally, we have a business that we can treat parts here at Aculon's facility if it's a requirement on your end that you would prefer some of the parts to be treated here, then we can certainly do that as well. We're based here in San Diego, California, and we focus really on a variety of areas. We're organized as a business by electronics, oil and gas, and specialty. And specialty includes optical, some industrial consumer goods, as well as medical devices. We're here today talking about medical devices because over the last few years it's become increasingly a request from customers, can we modify the surface of these devices? Initially, as a company, we started out focusing on the optical space and have been working in the electronics and oil and gas longer, but it becomes clear that we have some technologies that are applicable to this marketplace and have worked through a number of applications that are qualified in the marketplace. I will tell you, as a company, we will work with you relating to FDA approvals, but that's not been a focus for us in order to get FDA qualified. But in some cases, and some of my colleagues will talk about this, we have gone through biocompatibility testing for these applications. From San Diego, we will supply and ship the products globally. As you can see with this map here, we service the North American market from Aculon. We have a logistics and sales representation partner in Europe, and we have distributors and sales representation partners in Asia as well. So if you are looking to have a part produced or qualified in North America, but then maybe assembled at a contract manufacturer in Asia, we work with several of those contract manufacturers and obviously are open to working with whoever you deem as your contract manufacturer. As a company, as I say, we are surface modification experts. The initial technology that we started the business with is called self-assembled monolayers with phosphonate, so what we call SAMP and organometallics. Over the last 10, 12 years, the company has increased the number of technologies we have available to modify surfaces. So we've added polymeric organometallics, transitional metal complexates, and other surface modifications, many of which have been developed in-house, some of which have been licensed in. But as we get different surfaces and different requests from customers, we'd like to be able to offer a variety of technologies to try to solve the problem. Generally, how we work with customers is that you'll describe to us what the surface is and what performance parameters you want out of the surface, and then the team here will work with you and select the appropriate treatment that can achieve those performance parameters. You can either try that product directly by buying some samples from us, or you can send in parts and we can help qualify those parts for you. So with that, let me introduce my colleague Mario Gattuso, who heads up our electronics business, and he's going to talk to you a little bit about electronics waterproofing for medical devices. Mario.
Thank you, Edward, for that great introduction. As he mentioned, I'm going to get into the electronics waterproofing technologies that we have for medical devices, including how they're applied, how they perform, what devices are applicable, and to start it, we'll get into why a device might need to be waterproofed. So as you can imagine, there's numerous electronic devices that are utilized either by consumers in hospital or doctor environments that can be exposed to fluids such as water, saline, blood, and other bodily fluids that can potentially get on those parts and short them out and ruin them, and potentially cause failures at very critical moments, which is obviously very undesirable. This is an example or a list of some relevant medical devices where these treatments can be utilized. All of these treatments in some way use electronics, and so pretty much any type of electronic device that is exposed to liquid can potentially benefit from these technologies. So I won't get into all of these, but this will be available for you to look at when you download or when you receive the email copy of this webinar afterwards. Some of you may be familiar with the IPX waterproofing ranking system. This is simply a ranking system to determine how protected a device is from IPX 0, which is no protection. Essentially, any water exposure will cause a failure, all the way up to IPX 8, which, for all intents and purposes, is a waterproof device or a device that's intended to function underwater. Typically, what we find for medical devices is that achieving IPX 1 through 4 is sufficient to provide them with enough protection from exposure that they're going to see in normal use. Most of these devices are not at risk of being dropped into water and needing to survive. The main concern is splashing fluids of some sort. So Aculon has developed a range of products which can protect electronic devices in your device from just basic humidity to full water immersion. These products are award-winning and have been commercialized in several applications, including several medical devices. So to get into the products themselves, so all these materials are liquid phase. Were developed and are manufactured at Aculon, and they are Aculon proprietary technology. These are not relabeled chemistries. This is all Aculon's IP. They surpass competitive coatings in terms of performance, ease of use, and ease of implementation into production. And the application equipment is affordable and readily available and extremely flexible. Some of the key benefits of these treatments for, say, a consumer medical device is it reduces the chance of product returns or customer complaints due to water damage. In your production process, it will improve the yields as rework is still possible after coating the electronics on these boards. So if you have an issue with your board, you can still rework and fix the board. It does not have to be scrapped like with many traditional conformal coatings or Parylene. That would be a wasted part. A huge benefit to the nanoproof line of products is that zero or minimal masking is required, which can be quite labor intensive and tedious, and certainly complicates the production of the parts. These materials are all safe and non-toxic and can be utilized in a factory environment, and also they are quite reasonably priced and affordable on a per unit basis, and we do have a line of products at different performance levels and price points to meet your budgetary and performance expectations. So here we have a chart that gets into the 4 off-the-shelf offerings that we have, from 1.0, which is designed to provide incidental water protection at a very reasonable price, through 3.5 and 4.0, which provide mid-levels of protection and are very, very easily implemented, through 5.1, our most robust option, which is for your highest performance needs. So there's a lot of information on each of these products. I'm not going to get into all the details due to time constraints, but this will be available for you to review, and if you have specific questions on any of these, feel free to reach out. The main thing I do want to note is that 1.0, 3.5, and 4.0 all offer what we call push-through connectivity, which means that the electronic devices can be coated over the entire board, and you can still make electrical connections after the board has been coated. 5.1 does dry to a hard shell, so either the electronic connections need to be masked or solvent needs to be utilized to soften the coating to make the electronic connections after coating those parts. All of these materials come standard with the UV dye. The application equipment that applies these coatings, all of them traditionally come with UV inspection systems so that you can qualitatively identify whether a part has been treated and where it has been treated successfully. We've done extensive testing on the waterproofing performance of all these technologies by coating test boards, inserting them into salt water, and running the boards at high voltages to identify failures in performance over time. Very extensive amount of testing. The paper detailing the performance is available for download on our website, and we will also follow up after the webinar with links to this white paper if you would like to review it. To summarize the specific products, the 1.0 material is our most economical material and is good for achieving up to IPX3, 3.5 up to IPX4, 4.0 to IPX5, and for our IPX7 needs, 5.1 it can be utilized. For all of these materials, there is some to achieve their highest level of performance. There is definitely some iteration and collaboration required to identify how to treat the boards. So it is not just a matter of applying the material and getting it to work. Every board is unique, and it is an iterative process is required if the performance levels are critical. So how these materials are applied, as I mentioned, they're liquid phase technologies, so they are flexible. They can be sprayed, dispensed, or dipped. For the purpose of repeatability and ease of implementation, spray and dispense are actually far easier than dip, which is rather complicated to maintain a repeatable process in production. So for anything requiring significant volume, spray and dispense are always highly preferred over dip. But dip can be utilized for low volume applications or applications requiring an extremely simple process. We can assist there, but spray is preferred if possible. So we'll get into some of the comparisons to traditional water protective coatings. In the past, Parylene has been one of the most common protective coatings for electronics. but Repellent is extremely expensive and very, very complex to apply. So it's takes nearly 1 to 5 hours to treat a batch, and because it's batch, there's no inline or continuous processing, so it makes for very slow throughput, and then it's also very labor intensive because the parts need to be very critically masked, so the masking and demasking is quite labor intensive. Getting into advantage over other conformal coatings, again, because there's no cure required and no deposition required, the application process of a nanoproof line of materials is extremely simple. You simply spray, dip, or dispense, and there's no cure required, so there's no UV station, there's no curing oven, there's no vacuum deposition. It's a very, very simple process, resulting in minimal capital equipment while still yielding very, very high results. So as I mentioned, every product is unique and requires testing. So it is important to identify what sort of performance you're looking for. Start with the right material based on the performance desires, and an iterative process is really necessary to determine exactly how to process the parts in order to get the best possible performance. So in general, we don't find that the nanoproof materials impacts Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, speakers and microphone, or the camera and antenna. So the application can be done simply at first, and then as any issues are identified, those can all be sorted out until the desired results are achieved, and Aculon will work directly with you on your project to determine how to do that. So we'll get into some case studies. So hearing aids are a very, very good application for us. We work with several hearing aid companies. We're in production on several separate devices. The performance requirements are kind of mid-level, usually looking for IPX3 with IPX4 if possible. Due to the simplicity here, for this one example customer, they actually obtained the material themselves, treated their parts, and tested the sample successfully, identified that Nanoproof 4.0 met their needs, and they simply utilize a commercially available spray system from PVA to spray those electronics. They avoid the audio speaker to make sure that there's no negative acoustic impacts, and they successfully achieved IPX4 qualification on their products. For the next example, we had a customer come to us that has a device controller for a very significant piece of medical equipment, and these controllers are exposed to all sorts of fluids in this environment, and so they needed to be protected from sweat, splashing water, but not full immersion. There's no scenario really where these parts could be fully immersed. So they were looking for IPX4 and IPX5 if possible. Now there were some high voltage areas on these boards which determined that if exposure to salt water through some of our more mid-level treatments still caused some failures. So we worked through a few iterative processes with this customer to identify these high voltage failure areas, determined that the most robust option, 5.1, needed to be utilized over the entire electronics of the board, including the electrical connections. So we developed a process with this customer to treat the entire board, treat specific sensitive areas, and then also utilize a process for making electrical connections with a diluent solvent when assembling the device. And we did achieve IPX5 on this device for that customer, and they see no failures in the field. So to sum it up, we are the go-to for nanoscale electronics repellency technology, offering far simpler solutions than traditional conformal coatings to prevent critical failures. The level of performance versus cost is very high value. These are easy to apply and cost effective, and the application equipment is readily available and extremely economical versus other options. So with that, I'll introduce Eric Brunner, who is going to talk about our repellent and hydrophilic technologies for medical devices.
Thank you, Mario. My name is Eric Brunner. I lead the specialty chemical business here at Aculon, which includes medical devices. And we've kind of split the treatments into two sections. I'm going to run through some of our hydrophobic and oleophobic surface modification technology, and then discuss our hydrophilic treatments as well. So for repellency treatments, we have three technologies. The first one is based on what we call TMC chemistry. Here we're reacting organometallic compounds with hydrophobic polymers to form transition metal complexates, or TMCs. And these organometallics allow the polymer to bind to itself as well as the surface. The nice thing about this technology is it's widely applicable to a broad range of substrates. These materials are dissolved in solvents, and so they're in coating formulations that can be dipped, wiped, or sprayed on the surfaces. The next technology we have is SAMP technology. It's based on self-assembled monolayer of phosphonates. Here we're utilizing phosphonate chemistry to react with oxides. So mainly these formulations are used for treating metals. They can also treat organometallics and epoxies. They're also dissolved in solvents, and so they're deposited by either dip, wipe, or spray. And the last but not least, we have a technology around polymer growth. Here we're utilizing the SAMP technology to first modify a surface, and then we can attach a polymer to that surface or grow polymers from the surface. This is a little bit more of a complicated technology to apply, so usually it begins with parts being sent to Aculon and being applied here. Just to dig a little deeper into the SAMP technology, this illustrates the approach that we've taken here. Here we're reacting a phosphonate head group to a surface. We're forming covalent bonds that are very chemically strong and resistant to attack. The organic group that sticks out, for the case of repellency, we can make this either perfluorinated or choose a material that's repellent. These are very thin layers. We're dealing with a monolayer, so the thickness is typically between 2 and 4 nanometers thick. Basically this is all driven by the reaction of the phosphonate with the surface, and so this is solvent carriers carry the actives to the surface, and so they can be dipped, wiped, or sprayed on. So the approach we take with both the TMC chemistry as well as the SAMP technology is we think about it in terms of a hook and a tail, where you have a hook end of the molecule that react with the surface, and then a tail that sticks out. And we have a library of different tails that can impart different chemical functionalities at the surface, whether you're looking for lubricity, easy cleanability, some barrier performance or anti-corrosion, or adhesion, and in some cases some conductivity. For the repellency area, of course, we're using, usually it's a fluorinated compound, so you can get both water and oil repellency. About the hook, we choose our hooks, either phosphonic acids or organometallics, to form strong chemical bonds that are resistant to attack from chemicals and that are thermally stable. One of the great things about our technology is it's easy to apply. All of our chemistries are either solvent-borne or in 95% of them are solvent. There are some that are aqueous, but they're all carried by a solvent, so they can be dip applied, sprayed, wiped. We've done some, commercialized some in gravure printing where you're doing a roll-to-roll process, We've also formulated our chemistry into inks that can be pad printed, and then we also have this polymer growth technology. So most of the time, very low capital costs and start getting set up, and the process is simple. Here's a table that compares our repellent technologies. Starting with the TMC technology, this is broadly applicable to not only metals and glass, but also polymers, ceramics, and most surfaces. It's fairly easy to apply, doesn't require extensive cleaning. It's usually a single step process, and with usually pretty good performance. That we are forming chemical bonds to the surface, but they're not quite as strong as a SAMP, so we've got to kind of mark the durability as low. The thickness is usually between 2 and 10 nanometers, so it doesn't affect any sort of optical properties of substrate. SAMPs, on the other hand, really require an oxide, so they're mainly used for metals, semiconductors, glass, or other oxide-containing substrates. Here the bonding is especially important to make sure that you get the surface clean. So there's usually a couple steps where you have to clean, coat, and then in some cases you may need to do some rinsing. The performance level is very high in terms of repellency. We get water contact angles between 110 and 125. Industry-leading oil contact angles, this is hexadecane, between 70 and 90 degrees. Very good durability. They're covalently bound to the surface, and because they're so thin, there's optical clarity. The superhydrophobic SAMP technology is basically an extension of the SAMP, where we build up some roughness with an organometallic. That roughness introduces some haze to the surface, and it's also quite brittle. So mainly this is used for fluidic applications where the mechanical durability requirements are pretty low. But you do get a pretty substantial performance boost in water contact angles upwards of above 130 up to 170. Oil contact angles are very high, and this is usually done in a 3-step process where we spray the organometallic twice and then spray the SAMP solution. And then lastly, we have this polymeric growth technology, which is very versatile. It has the ability to basically customize the properties of the surface. We're using the SAMP to initially prime the surface and then grow polymers with different types of repellent backbones off that surface. There is chemical bonding to the surface, so the durability is good, and they're still quite thin, usually somewhere between 10 and 50 nanometers, so you have good optical clarity. So now I'm going to take you through some examples of where this technology has been commercialized. We've had a number of dispensing type applications come where the customer has wanted to prevent any sort of droplet accumulation on the end of the dispensing tip. And so here we're using our SAMP technology to modify stainless steel. The SAMPs not only repel water but oils, and so they prevent droplet accumulation at the tip. Another example where we've commercialized is in urine repellency. A company came to us and said they had a container and want essentially no droplets of urine left behind in this container. This application doesn't see mechanical abrasion, so we used our superhydrophobic SAMP treatment. It's a 3-step process with very high water contact angles and good performance. And so this was tested and carried out successfully. Another interesting area for medical devices is there's been a number of diagnostic chips where there's been a need for isolating droplets. So we had a customer come to us that needed to grow cells in certain areas on a chip, and so we developed a pad printable TMC formulation that could be applied and pattern the surface so that the droplets would, once dispensed, would stay in the locations where they were dispensed. Now I'd like to move to our hydrophilic surface modification technology, give you an overview of some of the treatments we have and some more examples. Here we really have two technologies. Once again, we use our transition metal complexate chemistry, where we're now taking hydrophilic polymers and reacting them with organometallics to form these transition metal complexates. They're dissolved into solvents, and then they can be deposited either by dip, wipe, or spray. We also use our polymer growth technology to make hydrophilic surfaces. We'll prime the surface with a SAMP and then tether hydrophilic polymers to that surface. Just a quick comparison, the TMC chemistry, once again, it's broadly applicable to a lot of different substrates, including polymers. It can be printed, dispensed. It's easy to apply. Durability is a little bit on the lower side compared to the SAMP technology, where we're able to attach hydrophilic polymers and really get very strong chemical bonding to the surface. Both of these are clear treatments. They're on the nanoscale and quite effective at making surfaces hydrophilic. One interesting area that we've been successful with is cell repellency. We had a customer come to us and had some metal filters that they wanted to prevent any sort of stiction of cells, and we were able to modify that surface with a hydrophilic polymer, gave low water contact angles, and did a really nice job of preventing the absorption of biological materials, including cells. Another area that's been interesting is mold release. We've used actually both hydrophobic and hydrophilic treatments for mold release. This, in the case of silicone hydrogels, we found the hydrophilic treatment to be especially effective. So the customer came to us with their molds, sent their molds in. We applied a SAMP and grew a polymer and returned them, and have gotten really good results in terms of mold release. And furthermore, there's been some biocompatibility testing done on the treatments, and as we know, our treatments are non-toxic, but we actually, in this case, there was quite extensive testing done and found that the treatments were completely biocompatible for FDA compliance. Another area which hydrophilic treatments seem to be quite important for, especially for polymers, where you're trying to get aqueous solutions to wet and have good fluidic properties. Here we essentially used the hydrophilic TMC. We dispensed it into the polymer. It takes the water contact angles from initial 60 to 90 degrees down to less than 10 degrees, and really improves the capillary action and allows the wetting of the aqueous solutions throughout the fluidic channels. And one last case study. This is one recently that we've commercialized, and it's really had to do with bonding agarose gel to PMMA. We found a hydrophilic TMC that was quite effective here. It was wipe applied to the PMA surface, cured 60C, and then the gel's cast, and we're getting good performance, greater than 2 pounds per square inch of adhesion. And another good example of using our hydrophilic treatments for medical devices. So in summary, I'll turn it back over to our CEO, Edward Hughes.
Thanks, Eric. So that's great. So hopefully you've seen in the last 30 odd minutes or so that we have a number of different surface modification technologies. We work with a lot of different substrates, and so it's critical for us early on in the conversations and potentially in your questions now is help us understand the substrate you're looking for, because we tend to look at this as, can we modify the substrate, and then can we achieve the performance that you are looking to achieve. And as you saw, we have a pretty broad suite of performance modifying treatments to do that. So so now I guess we should probably go to questions, and again, if you have questions, please type them into the question box, and we'll try and tackle as many as we can. We've also been joined by Eric Hansen, who's our head of technology, and so any particularly challenging questions we can always throw his way. So with that, Mario, why don't you kind of quarterback us through the questions?
Sounds good. We've had a few come through already, and we've dedicated quite a bit of time to questions, so don't be shy. Fill your questions in, and we'll address them as they come in. And if we haven't answered your question yet, don't feel free to ask more. We're just going to go through the list, and so we may not get to your questions for 5 or 10 minutes, but we will get to them. So the first question that's come through is it possible to have a super solvent phobic coating, such as to acetone or terpineol? And so maybe Eric, one of you guys can touch on that.
Our oleophobic treatments repel organics, and I'm not sure if we have contact angles of acetone or terpineol, but generally they're repellent to oils and organic materials. So I think it is possible to repel those materials. It's we'll just have to. I think we'd have to look in our database for contact angles. Do you want to comment, Eric?
Sure. Yeah, they're going to be solvent repellent. So they are the so-called oleophobic coatings are not going to be wetted by anything other than essentially fluorocarbons. So the surface tension has to be 20 dynes or lower. When you're talking about super or ultra oleophobic things, which actually would cause the oil droplets to bead up, that's a bit of a different class of chemistry. So there's a very specific type of coating chemistry that does that. I currently don't have one here, but I know how they function.
Okay. Thank you, Eric.
Sure.
You, Eric. Next question, which I can address, is very simple, is are the coatings transparent? So not quite sure which of the technologies you're referring to, but I can touch on that. Most of the nanoproof materials are transparent as long as they're applied in a careful manner. If they're applied unevenly, there may be some optical effects, but if they're applied properly, the nanoproof, the electronics coatings are transparent. And most all of the hydrophobic and hydrophilic are also 100% transmission. They are transparent. The only one that's not transparent is the superhydrophobic coating. Due to the patterning that's required to get the superhydrophobicity, there is some transmission loss, so you have about 60% transmission. So hopefully that answers your question. Next question is, what testing have you done to show the durability of the TMC, the SAMP, and the polymeric growth coatings? Have you done ASTM tests? And by durability, I mean the longevity of the contact angle values. Eric, I think you can touch on that. There's going to be a different answer for each of those technologies, of course, but we have done significant testing, so I'll let you go ahead.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a tough one to answer because there's so many different application substrates, coating chemistries, so it would take a while to really kind of go over it. But generally speaking, the coatings are pretty durable. They'll withstand exposure to solvents and water and stuff like that, or saline. Sort of generally speaking, 9 times out of 10 what we typically find is the substrate sort of the weakest link. So when people pick a durable substrate, then our coatings last quite a long time. But if it's a condition where the substrate is inherently weak to the exposure conditions, then the coating, sometimes the coating can be removed along with the substrate. But 9 times out of 10, it's really good durability. in terms of retaining its contact angle.
Yeah, like go to the stamp. With the stamp, we use that in a broad variety of industries, and so whether it's in electronics, we use it in printing applications where you're seeing 50,000 print cycles on it. So very abrasion durable, and we've done some ASTM testing. So I mean, we'd have to get into the specifics of what that person's asking for, but these coatings have been used in oil and gas and electronics, and obviously now in medical devices. I think the charts indicate some, which ones are durable and which ones aren't durable. So, but if that person wants to email Mario or Eric afterwards, we can get into a bit more specifics.
Okay. The next question is, do any of the Aculon materials have a water vapor transfer ratio specification? I am interested in something that can prevent water vapor from passing through polycarbonate, something with glass-like properties.
Sure, yeah. So that's something that we're sort of keenly interested in as well, mainly for our, waterproofing treatments. Generally, the Nanoproof 5.0 series are kind of geared towards that. I don't have measurements of moisture vapor transmission rates that can be measured. All you have to do is cast a free film, and there are companies that will measure those, but it's intended to have very low rates so that you don't get, water vapor as well as oxygen, corroding substrates.
And you can spray that on the polycarbonate.
Sure, yeah. Polycarbonate would be a good substrate for it.
Yep.
Okay, thank you, Eric. Next question, is there a coating that can be used on stainless steel that reduces or repels fingerprints or dirt? So sure, I can handle that question. We do offer materials that can bond to stainless steel and are repellent, so that would likely be one of our SAMP type coatings, and that will make the stainless steel repellent to oil. You saw the contact angles was in the range of 80 degrees. So it won't 100% prevent the transfer of oil or fingerprints to the part, but it'll reduce the amount of oil that transfers and make that stainless steel surface repellent to the fingerprint and oil and dirt, and make it far easier to clean without solvents or cleaning agents. So the next question is, do we have any data that shows how well the oleophobic coatings work to repel fuels such as gasoline and diesel?
We do. In the oil and gas space, we don't have it in the medical device space, but in the oil and gas space, we have been using SAMP technology on stainless steel for sensors used in oil storage tanks, and to prevent paraffin buildup from crude oil. And those have been in the field for over 4 years, and they've had no buildup of paraffins on them, whereas normally the maintenance guys would basically have to go into those tanks and clean those sensors every 3 to 6 months to remove the paraffin buildup. So it's a great example of a really tough environment where that has prevented oil buildup on stainless steel. So it's an oil and gas example, not a medical example, but it's a real world, and we use that technology in the medical space for treating stainless steel.
Yeah, and paraffins would be more difficult to repel than something like gasoline, which has a lower viscosity.
Right.
So thank you, guys. Next question is, apologies, I was late for the webinar, and will we receive a recording or slides for download? So for anyone who was late or didn't catch it, we will be sending an email later today, most likely around the end of the day, that's going to have a link to a recording of this webinar. You'll have a PDF of all these slides and also some medical device specific links to our website with content for you to review. So we will be getting that to everyone who not only attended the webinar, but everyone who registered will receive that. Next question is, with all the different surfaces such as a painted touchscreen, printed circuit boards, metals, diaphragms such as a stethoscope, how can you coat on the consumer end? So that's a good question. So typically, most of these materials are applied in production or on the OEM or at the contract manufacturer. But of course we can work with you to provide a kit or sell something that the consumer can use to coat their part. And really that's kind of, it'd be really difficult to touch on how we can address that. It's going to depend on which, what performance you're looking to achieve with the consumer treating the part, and what parts the consumer's trying to treat. So we can work with you on that on a case-by-case basis. We can set up obviously treatment in production, and we can also sell consumer applied kits. And how we do that kit, what product it is, how they apply it, really depends on the product, the substrate, and what you're looking to achieve. So I'd encourage you to reach out to me with your questions and more detail, the person who asked that or anyone interested, and I'd be happy to spend some time talking to you about that.
Let me just add to that. Yeah, we're a business-to-business setup, so we basically provide the chemistry to facilities that it can be applied to. We do have examples where we have product that is applied in a wipe format that an operator in the field can do, and so we have that in electronics where we're selling wipes for the treatment of stencils, stainless steel stencils. We have that in the automotive sector where we're selling wipes for treating wheels. We have that for sapphire where the operator can treat that. So we do have the ability to put our chemistry, many of our chemistries, into a wipe format that can be easily applied in the field by an operator. So, but again, it's generally a business-to-business type relationship where we would sell that to an optical company if they're looking at sapphire, or if it's a medical instrumentation company, they would buy boxes of the sapphire wipes, apply that to sapphire.
Thank you, Edward. Next question is, would it be possible to apply a hydrophilic solution onto VHB or acrylic foam to increase the adhesion of a silicone gel? So I'll let...
What's that again?
The question is, can a hydrophilic solution be sprayed onto an acrylic foam to increase the adhesion of a silicone gel?
Potentially, but we would have to test that. We've done adhesion of, like the agarose gel, for example, to PMMA, and the TMC style chemistry that we use to get adhesion of materials to siloxanes might also adhere to the silicone gel, but it comes down to chemistry.
Okay.
Let's give it a shot.
Yeah, so so for the person who asked that question, I don't think that's no, we can't do it, but that's a unique application. So I think there's some avenues where we can try to see if we can help you there. So please reach out and we'll talk to you about your application and see if we can assist. So going through the questions here, there's quite a few more. So questions come through, do we sell the hydrophilic coating for prototyping use in-house, including both the TMC and polymeric growth technology? So the polymeric growth technology is something that is proprietary to Aculon, and it's something we typically only do at our facility here. In some cases, we may potentially license that pending the application. For the TMCs, that's material that we sell. So we can either sample you material or ideally work with you on your parts to figure out how to treat your parts and which of our TMCs or other technologies work best. And then we're happy to essentially pack out and ship the chemistry for you to apply at your facility. Another question has come through. Do you have a recommendation for how to get a hydrophilic and oleophobic surface? How to achieve, so somebody is looking to achieve a hydrophilic and oleophobic surface.
Hydrophilic and oleophobic. That's something we have worked on, and there are ways to do it, but it definitely going to be substrate dependent, so we need to find out what substrate they're working on and kind of what values of hydrophilicity, if it needs to be super hydrophilic or oleophobic. That's sort of a project that's been in the works, but we don't have commercial products on it right now.
Okay, so For the person looking for hydrophilic and oleophobic surface, we don't have something off the shelf, but we do have, we have studied that and we have worked on it. So depending on the details of what you're looking for in your substrate, it's possible we can help. So please reach out and we'll look to help you there. Let's see what the next question is. Next question is, after application of the coating, is any curing or cross-linking step involved? And I can answer that pretty much for all of our materials. One of the key benefits to our technologies is that a cure, whether it's oven or UV or waiting for the parts to cross-link, is not required. These are extremely fast reactions. They react with the surface, but there's no oven or UV cure required. So it makes them very process friendly and easy to apply.
And maybe you can address how long they take to dry.
Yes, so for the nanoproof, for the electronics coatings, those dry very quickly in about 5 to 10 minutes and are pretty much fully set within an hour. And then for the other coatings, the TMC, the SAMP, I mean, those dry within seconds, if not less than a minute, and are essentially fully reacted. Now, some of the multi-step processes, each of those steps is quick, but there are a few steps involved. The only process that does take some time is the polymeric growth, as the amount of time that the parts are exposed to essentially the growth bath determines how thick the coating is. So the thickness will determine the time. Here's an interesting question. I don't know that we've looked at this, but do you have an aerophobic coating? In other words, we have an underwater application and we need to reduce the bubble adhesion of air to the surface.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we use hydrophilic coatings to do that for air displacement.
Okay. Yeah, so if you use a hydrophilic coating on the surface, you should displace those air bubbles. So we can help you with that application if you want to send us details on your parts and product. Next question is, do the hydrophobic SAMP materials withstand cleaning solvents such as IPA, bleach, and others? So maybe Eric Brunner, can you touch on that?
Sure. Actually, we use IPA as part of our quality control for testing lots to just make sure that it's absolutely resistant to IPA. In terms of bleach, that's going to be substrate dependent. A lot of metals will get etched by bleach, and generally anything that's going to etch the underlying substrate can destroy our coating, so I'd be a little bit wary of bleach. We can take a two-step approach to avoid some of that. We can do an epoxy plus a SAMP to provide resistance to strong bases for some substrates. So I'd also encourage you to reach out to us with your application and see if we can help you.
Great, thank you, Eric. Next question that's come through is it possible to apply a powder coating type finish over your coatings? For our repellent treatments, the action of making the surface repellent to liquid also acts as essentially a mold release, reducing the surface energy. So you could attempt to apply a powder coating, but the adhesion to the surface is going to be compromised. So if that's not an issue, you could potentially apply it, but you may have delamination or adhesion issues. With the hydrophilics, I'm not quite sure. Eric, do you have any thought on whether they could apply a powder coating over the hydrophilics?
Yeah, they can. I think you can use a SAMP technology and put a reactive head group or reactive tail group on the end of it. So depending on what the powder coating is, we may have a primer that can help, but it's going to be specific to what type of coating you're depositing. So that one, the kind of devil's probably in the details, so we'll need some more details on what the substrate is and what type of coating you're depositing.
Yeah, I think maybe the question is, I mean, if you're looking for adhesion promoting, then we can help with some primers that can potentially help bond the powder coating. But for the repellency type technologies, generally that's the outer layer, because we're trying to keep water or grease or something off, or oils off it. Yeah, if you have more details, send it in to Eric or Mario, and then maybe we can talk about it.
Sounds good. Thank you. Next question is, can the polymeric growth technology be used on a polyurethane and PEBAX substrate?
Not yet. Right now it's limited to metals and metal oxides. I'd like to start working on plastics to be able to do the initiation from the plastic surface, but right now we're not currently doing that.
Okay. Okay, so unfortunately the polymeric growth is not applicable on polyurethane or PEBAX. Next question is, can you coat these surfaces, polystyrene, polypropylene, silicone olefin copolymers? And the answer to that is yes, depending on which chemistry we're looking at and what you're looking to perform. So the TMCs can be applied on any of those, whether it's the TMC hydrophilic or the TMC hydrophobic. Eric Berner, do you know if any of the other technologies can be applied on those substrates?
I would probably break the substrates up a little bit. The polyolefins are particularly tough to get real chemical bonding to. We've gotten, in terms of repellency, we've gotten actually the Nanoproof 5 series. The Nanoproof 5.1 has been really good for polyolefins. We have gotten some of our organometallics to get some amount of bonding to the cyclic olefin copolymers, the Xenor type materials. What was the other substrate they listed?
Polystyrene, polypropylene, and cycloolefins.
Yeah, for polystyrene, I'd also point you towards the Nanoproof 5.1 coating for repellency.
Okay, thank you, Eric. Next question is, what temperature can the coatings withstand? So all of these treatments are polymeric in nature. So in general, they're stable to about 225 Celsius before they become significantly compromised. And in general, for any sort of long-term exposure, you want to ideally have them below 200 Celsius. We don't see any issues on the low temperature end of the spectrum. Let's see. Next question is, which of these coatings are resistant to alcohol and other common cleaners used in a clinical setting?
Most of them, right?
Yeah.
Most of them, and especially SAMPs on the metals, are very good solvent resistance.
Yeah.
As well as this 5 series, Group 5. Good solvent resistance.
Yeah. Most all of the treatments we discussed today are resistant to the common organic solvents that you mentioned. Let's see. So I got some information from the person who submitted the question about consumer application with some more detail. I'd encourage you to reach out. So I see the details you've provided here. I don't want to advertise it to everyone, but send me an email and let's talk about how we can help you with your operation. Next question is, do the coatings leave a surface texture? We have an application where an aluminum dispenser is subject to banging against other metal components. What is the best method of coating a surface under these harsh conditions, and how long could it potentially last? So to touch on the surface texture, the nanoproof electronics coatings will leave a slight slick texture, but based on your description, I assume you're talking about either a repellent or a hydrophilic. The repellent treatments will not leave a surface texture except for the superhydrophobic due to the layering to roughen the surface. And then as far as the durability for the part and the action is exposed to banging against other metal components, that's difficult to say. We'd really need to test that. These are durable treatments, but if that banging is damaging your substrate, our coatings aren't going to protect the aluminum from getting damaged, and the coating will get damaged along with it. So we'd need to talk to you in a bit more detail, or perhaps use some testing. Some testing.
Generally, in those cases, we'll need to do some type of coating that actually protects the substrate first, and then apply one of our treatments.
Next question is, does Aculon TMC, is it applied by a spray or dip? So the TMCs can be applied by spray, by dip, and they can even be wiped on. It's very flexible in terms of how it can be applied to a surface. So both of those are suitable. Next question is, what is the durability of your TMC technology? Is it good for a single-use device for a few hours? And so the TMC technologies, are designed for either products that have very low exposure, whether it's mechanical or chemical exposure, and typically, depending on the exposure conditions, a few hours on a device should be absolutely no problem for the TMCs. Again, pending what the exposure conditions are. If you expose it to something that will damage it immediately, then it could be a problem. So we would need details on the exposure conditions, and we could then advise what sort of lifetime you could expect. And then the next question from that same person is, how can I order a sample or discuss the application? Well, you'll see right in front of you, you have the contact info for myself and for Eric Bruner, so please feel free to email either of us. And we're also going to be sending out information along with the webinar on how you can source some of these treatment samples.
But I think it's also fair to say on the TMCs, if you're talking about repellency for fluids, for a few hours, it's not a problem. So in many of the industries we work in, we think about durability as a function of abrasion from mechanical wear, so optical type applications where you've got denim rubbing against it, or you've got something else abrading against it. If the question is really related to fluids, the TMC should be more than adequate for that type of application that that person's asking about.
Thank you, Edward. Good point. Next question is, in general, how thick are the TMC coatings?
Typically, it depends on how they're applied. You get a little thinner treatment if you're doing a dip application. You can build up thickness by spraying and continual spraying, but usually the standard sort of deposition leaves a thickness between 2 and 10 nanometers.
Thank you, Eric.
Nanometers.
Next question is, are these coatings suitable for a fiberglass radome covering antenna to prevent ice buildup? And if they are, how durable are they with exposure to UV? So that's a good question. We've looked at ice prevention several times, and these treatments are going to lower the surface energy of a part to prevent adhesion. But they're not going to prevent condensation or ice from forming on a surface. So ice and condensation are still going to form on a surface, and it's possible that the reduced adhesion could help that ice to fall off, and it just kind of depends on the substrate and the part. And then as far as UV exposure, most of these technologies are not UV stable and intended for permanent outdoor applications, so they would need to be reapplied on some schedule depending on the level of UV exposure for an application like that. Next question is, are there any polymers that the polymer growth technology can be applicable on? So Eric Bruner, can you possibly touch on that?
Can be used on epoxy, polysiloxanes. Eric, are there any others? Because I mean, if we put down this SAM first, right?
Yeah, it generally comes from a monolayer first. But all of my work isn't focused on metals and metal oxides.
Yeah, all the work has been focused on metal and metal oxides, but there is a chance that we may be able to work with anywhere a SAMP can bond. So, we've been successful with polysiloxanes and epoxies.
Okay, so as long as it sounds like as long as we can apply a SAMP underlayment first on the polymer, such as epoxies or siloxanes, and maybe if you select others, then we can apply the polymeric growth on that polymer. Next question is it available in liquid form, and what's the vapor pressure at room temperature? Depending on what you're looking for, I can certainly help you to answer that, but we have talked about what encompasses probably over a few dozen different technologies, so it would take me a while to go through all that. All of them are in liquid form. The vapor pressures, I can get that info to you if after finding out what you're looking for. So for now, that wraps up the questions. So thank you very much for attending. As I mentioned, we will be sending out the recording of this webinar. We will be sending out a PDF of it, and you have our contact information there, so please reach out, and we look forward to helping you with your applications. Thank you very much for attending.